I dream big and I work small. It's pretty lonely and it's fucking hard and it doesn't get easier.
Whatever reps are in your sport, in your business, or your chosen field, you do them. And there is only one catch. You can't miss a day.
But if you have that dream, you have to embrace that. And that comes with building a relationship with failure, which is inevitable, and then just keep going.
Paul Rabil, welcome to Post Run High.
I'm so happy to be here. What a great run we just had.
Such a great run.
Oh,
How was it for you?
I can't tell if I want to take a nap or if I want to talk.
Is your Post Run High going, or would you rather Post Run Rot right now?
Post Run High. Let's discuss.
So Paul and I ran about a mile in Brooklyn. It's
That's
June.
it?
Yeah. Maybe actually, you know what? I actually think for when you first started walking, not to call out Paul for walking. No, I'm just kidding. When we first started walking and I had to fix my hair, that was probably about a mile. So I feel like we did like 1.7.
Jeremy, what do you think? 2?
Over under 1.5.
1.5. Hey, I'll take it. 1.5. Yeah. I wanted to lift and you wanted to run and I'm your guest. So we're going to run.
So this podcast theme is all about movement. So let's first talk a little bit about physically. What does movement look like in your life right now?
Oh, well, I wish I was doing more of it, if I'm being honest, because I'm working 7 days a week with the PLL because we're in season now and it's wall to wall. So I intentionally put my phone on Do Not Disturb when I wake up in the morning to get lemon juice and alkalize and make a coffee and try to read a chapter of a book before the inevitable storm comes, which is, league, teams, players, marketing, sponsorship, ticket sales, venue, travel. And that comes with the territory. So I feel really blessed to be able to do that on a day-to-day. But what's been challenging is not being able to train and use my body the way that I did for 28 years while I was playing and then 14 years professionally. I honestly feel like I communicate and I flow through physical activity. I love sport and I love lifting and I love running and sprinting. So I have to fix that, admittedly. But it is, we're built to move.
I feel like the hardest part of being an athlete that has played at the level that you've played at is you love sports so much and moving your body, but the wear and tear on your body is so incredible when you play at that level.
Totally.
And it does not set you up for success later in life after you stop playing because your body has, I'm sure just so many injuries that you're constantly nursing and.
Totally. I think the primary or the guarantee in sport is that there's going to be pain, and it's about how we persist and respond and grow from it. And the pain can be as small as missing a shot. It can be losing a game. It can be getting injured. It can be getting traded. All these things come and they cause so much pain, but in sport, you get to respond right away, which sometimes in life and our careers, we don't. So you get this immediate feedback loop and this opportunity to first take accountability, which I think is so important to get right. Because I tried to write about this in my book that if you reframe pain and build a relationship with it and know that on the other side of it is going to be the sunlight, what's important to get right is that to get to the sun, you have to take accountability and you have to look at yourself and understand why you missed that shot, why you lost that game, why you might have been injured. And then you have to put in the work to respond. And that's when your foundation enlarges. And most of us, when we go through pain, and myself included early on, sulked and regretted and ruminated and I should have done this. And you're just living in the past. And then the other side of it, again, is jumping into the future. So you just have to be present. And so that's one of so many lessons I've learned in sport.
When you're moving your body now, do you still feel like you are constantly making yourself push through pain, or are you sometimes holding yourself accountable and being like, you know what, like I think I need to take a little bit of a reset right now?
Yeah. I think that, in life we evolve, and when I was an athlete, it was very much about improvement and being the best version of myself physically and mentally on the field such that the team could win. Now that I'm retired, I have to evolve that mindset into what is my routine, what is my work ethic, what is my best version to help the team win now. And it's probably more intellectual now, and it's more soft skills like management and patience and motivation. And so I wrote about this lesson I learned from a coach when I was at a recruiting camp when I was in 8th grade. And he asked a pool of lacrosse players who wanted to be great that question: who wants to play at the next level? Who wants to get a scholarship? Raise your hand. We all did. And he goes, I'll tell you how you can do that. You have to shoot 100 shots a day. And if you do that from this day forward through your senior year in high school, I guarantee you'll get a scholarship to the Division I program of your choice. And that felt really attainable. Then he said, but here's the caveat: you can't miss a day. And that's so easy to do in life because of holidays or weather or injury, and you have to find a way. In lacrosse, there aren't very many goals. Especially if you live in the middle of the country. On the coast, you may be able to find some at local park and rec fields. But I used to make goals, and I'd shoot against a fence at a backstop of a baseball park, and always find a way. And so stringing that along into what I do now, what are my 100 shots? Like, it's not going out on the field and shooting 100 shots against the net. That's not helping me grow the PLL or write a book or produce a show. So figuring out those 100 shots, I'm sure you have a version of that in your career.
The coolest thing about movement is when people think of it in the literal sense, they think about the physical activity, which we just did, right? We went for a run. And then I think about movement mentally, emotionally, and really movement on this pursuit of greatness. And your career in life has been such a testament to the power of just keeping going and the success that you've been able to achieve through doing that. So I would love to start this podcast off by just going back to the beginnings of who Paul was and where he grew up and where, you got your start.
Sure. So I grew up in a neighborhood called Whetstone in Montgomery Village, Maryland. And I have an older brother and younger sister and two amazing parents who never pushed us to high achieve. I never thought about really like what success meant. They were very spiritual people who cared about family and exploring passions. And so for us in a household where my dad grew up playing basketball, it was always like exploring different sports. I did some theater, I played some music, but ultimately sport felt like my calling. So I played soccer or basketball, played a little bit of baseball, a little bit of football, track and field, swimming. And that was I'm so grateful for that because I think today a lot of kids in sports, they're being pushed and pressurized to, be great. And what has to happen first, because I told you that story about in 8th grade, but I started playing in 6th. What has to happen first is you have to have fun and you have to explore, the movement and the love for what you do. And I stumbled on lacrosse somewhat later because my neighbor gave me a backup stick and he was my best friend. So I went on the team and I really struggled with it. But that pursuit of learning a new skill and, with the help of my mom who would drag me to practice because I actually at the time was really mature and hated that I wasn't good at it and that I was failing at it. So she pushed me along. And then at some point you reach that tipping point and you acquire a new skill and then you're going to find out if you love it or not. And I found out pretty quickly that I loved lacrosse. And that carried me through most of my life. And lacrosse now has given me an education. It's given me relationships. It's given me opportunity far more than I ever could have imagined.
It's crazy to see everything unfold. And I'm excited to unpack it today and really tell your story because it's just amazing everything you've been able to do yourself in the sport and now what you're doing for the sport and beyond and the other passions that you're pursuing. And it's just really, it's so interesting and just like a testament to you. I grew up playing lacrosse, right? I grew up in Bergen County, New Jersey. Lacrosse was like the sport there. And I have two brothers that played lacrosse at Yale. They won a national championship. And growing up playing travel sports, I knew that Maryland was obviously super competitive. Like whenever we would have our club tournaments and play against the girls in Maryland, we knew it was going to be a tough game. So for you to come in and start playing at 12 years old when you're in 6th grade, what was it like starting to play alongside some of these other players that had been playing with their parents who also played lacrosse, right? Until starting at maybe 6 or 7?
Yeah, it's a good question because there's this Titleist Performance Institute study that says that kids stop playing sport or they quit for 3 reasons. 1, they're not having fun. 2, the skill is too difficult. And 3 is they're outsized. Because kids grow at all different sizes at different speeds. And a lot of times you're lumped in a team based on your age, but you may have a guy who's so much bigger than you, get pushed over and you're not having fun, you quit. So entering a sport, being behind at the skill level of most of the kids who were on my team, I could have turned over and quit. And that's why I brought up my mom. She kept me in it. And then I used my mind and creativity. I think about work ethic for pro athletes quite a bit, and sort of like the monotony in lacrosse. You probably know this is like hitting the wall. You just pass against the wall for hundreds and hundreds of reps a day, and then taking the same shot over and over and over again. And if you look at a good piece of scripted or unscripted sports content on Netflix or ESPN Plus, whatever it is, these stories do everything but really tell what's actually going on, which is visually boring. The athlete going to the gym every day, bench pressing, squatting, passing against the wall. I mean, thousands and thousands of times. So what they do is you tell the narrative about the person and things that they do away from the field, drive to survive, etc. So I use my creativity to get out on the practice field to try to improve and catch up to my peers in a shorter amount of time that it took them to get the skill that they were at that moment. And I noticed in hindsight that I would just practice differently. And I sort of used the wall as a canvas. My mom was an art teacher, and I loved the idea. She told me to sort of explore painting outside the lines. And a player now, for example, I think who does that in the NBA is Kyrie Irving. He's in the same rules on the same size court as everyone, but he just kind of flows differently. And that was a secret of mine, is trying to, paint outside the lines within the discipline and the consistency of working every day. And that's what helped me close the gap.
I love knowing that you have such like a creative mind also in how you see the world. And it's interesting knowing that your mom was an art teacher. Like I definitely had more of a creative brain than I had like a math and science type of brain. And when I think back too to like when I was playing lacrosse or playing basketball, whatever the sport was, I always felt like I could see the field or see the court very well. And obviously I played at such a different type of level than you, so recreational. But I'm wondering, like, do you think having this creative mind that you definitely operate in, right? Like you're a storyteller, you're a writer, you're a producer. Do you think that helped you in lacrosse?
100%.
Yeah, let's paint that picture.
Yeah, I mean, even today with the PLL, I think most of what I do is think about the art of storytelling. And I remember when we were raising money, we went to this investor and owner of the Golden State Warriors, and he owned some casinos, and amazing entrepreneur that grew up playing lacrosse, and Peter Gruber. And I remember telling Peter when we were pitching him on how we could make pro lacrosse great was it sports as entertainment. It's what Vince McMahon used to say about WWE. And I studied the WWE growing up, and I'm like, oh yeah, they tell these great stories. It's like Shakespeare, except, in a ring. And Peter goes, no, it's not entertainment. It's show business. And he changed my mind, because I was like, holy shit. Like it's actually bigger than just entertaining and media. There's all different means of where at the time sports wasn't, but it is today, where you see scripted and unscripted television, film, documentaries, doc-series, books, podcasts, social media, live events with your network partner. And it's about how you can invite the viewer on any size screen at any given moment into the game through the narrative of the players, the stakes, the suspense, the surprise, sometimes the comedy. And then at the end, that it's the best form of content because the ending hasn't been written yet. So you're like, fuck, what's going to happen? And that's what makes sports so compelling for a viewer, and why I think it's the last standing firewall for appointment watching television and advertising. So I'm blessed and really lucky that I had a creative mom and a creative dad. And, that when I was playing lacrosse, we didn't have a network partner. So people couldn't watch the games unless they subscribed to Lacrosse Sports Network at the time. And so I then got into social media to tell the story of what a professional lacrosse player was doing during a day-to-day or week-to-week basis, what it meant to compete and win and lose. And I launched a YouTube channel. Then I launched a podcast. And it was like, oh, for someone who's not classically trained in storytelling, that's an advantage sometimes. And I try to carry that with me every day.
One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about was the content strategy. So it is so cool hearing what you just said. And it seems like when you were creating content, about yourself as an athlete, showing like what a lacrosse player's life is like on the field, off the field, and you are such a good content creator. Did you know in the back of your head, I'm educating people on this sport more so than like just showing myself?
Yeah, I think there's a difference between self-promotion and telling someone about your passion or what you love to do. And the creator economy, and whether you're an influencer, you're an athlete or an entertainer, author, in the middle of it, whatever it is, as long as authentically you're telling your audience or an audience something that you love to do, that you genuinely care about, then that unlocks the freedom to, for me, publish. And there have been plenty of times where, because of sort of the zeitgeist of attention and fame and all this, where you start like self-criticizing and maybe go down the path of publishing something that doesn't feel right, feels a little grabby, feels a little breathy. And you know immediately when it gets published. You can feel it in your gut, and you might go archive it or whatever, but you're like, that wasn't
Yeah.
right. But it takes reps, just like sport, just like podcasting, to figure that out. And there's a lot of paralysis, I think, today and now, like what was new media for me. And I was an early adopter because when I graduated from Hopkins in 2008, Instagram hadn't launched yet, and Facebook just rolled out fan pages, and Twitter came out 2 years later, and YouTube was full of cat videos. Like it was different. And so I never got on social personally. I got on always professionally. My friends in the next generation, they've adopted social personally. And then if they get to a place where they want to build a career around it, there's friction, because everyone's out to make fun of each other. And in a lot of ways, these social platforms like aggregate trolls and negative commentary and stuff like that. So really, I say all that because you're finding your core as a creator or a manifester, and sharing what it is that you care about is all that matters.
If you guys are enjoying this episode, please do us a quick favor and hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps more people discover these conversations, and it helps us continue bringing on amazing guests. I know we're going to have a lot of parents listening to this. So, hey, parents listening.
Hi.
Let's talk about your journey to Hopkins.
Mhm.
You go from 12 years old, starting to play lacrosse. 4 years later, you're making the varsity team at your public school. You eventually transferred to a private school that excelled in athletics, right? What was the high school that you transferred into? And like, what was the reason that you went there? And how did that kind of like sharpen you athletically?
Well, I went to a sort of private school that my mom taught at in Montgomery Village all the way through 8th grade. And then I couldn't wait to go to the public school and like spend time with my neighborhood friends. And I was on the lacrosse team at the time, and our coach was the assistant basketball coach. And then he'd missed some practices. My brother was on the team. So a lot of our spring practices were sort of captain's practices anyway. And I was starting to excel at the game. And there was a coach that came to me that inevitably became my next high school coach that asked me, like, do you think you play college lacrosse? And that moment I thought, I think I could. So I went and had a conversation with my parents, and we consulted around like the best path forward. So I ended up transferring to DeMatha, which is sort of the lowest priced private school in the state of Maryland. And I was given an athletic scholarship. And in a way, I went in my sophomore year and I felt like I was 12 years old again, playing lacrosse for the first time, where the team was so good and I wasn't going to start. And they had 11 Division I recruits. And I just went back to the wall and that canvas and envisioned sort of the motor skills of Andy Gallagher and Billy Looney and Keegan Wilkinson and like the star offensive players on that DeMatha team at the time. And I tried to emulate it. And I just worked and worked and worked and worked. And then by the time the spring came around, I was starting on the midfield. And then I progressed. So that was my story in transferring. It was a really hard decision. And I find the hardest decisions in life are ones that aren't very clear. I probably could have played college lacrosse had I stayed at Watkins Mill. And it's likely that I could be sitting here with you today had I stayed there. And I also am pleased with the decision that I made. I had another decision like that in college. And then I had another decision like that in pro and leaving a job that I had to try to become full-time in lacrosse. I had another decision like that in my relationship. I was once married and then I went through a divorce. And as humans, we want definitive answers, and they're not there. So the more in tune we can be with our instincts, the better our inner circle is of friends and advice we can get, the more open we are to feedback. And then ultimately just being decisive. And there's this saying that Jeff Bezos has, which is disagree and commit. And that doesn't often happen, even at the PLL, where we disagree and commit, but it gives you license to be like, okay, what's most important is you commit to a decision and you see it through, and you let go of any hindsight, Monday morning quarterback, any regret. And on the other side of it, there's no blame. It's not healthy to go back and be like, if DeMatha didn't work, for me to go back and be like, Mom, Dad, you guys said this, you told me it was a good idea. That doesn't do anyone any service. Disagree, commit, or agree and commit, or decide quickly, commit.
I mean, what's so cool too about you is like, there's so many kids, like you said before.
I talk a lot.
I love it. You know what? You're such a good talker. Wait, but guys,
like Celsius, maybe.
The way Paul will like answer a question and then go off in this like really eloquent direction and then kind of come back to, okay, you're like, okay, so DeMatha.
Strange, right?
No, it's amazing.
Like,
I mean, it makes sense why you're a writer.
Podcasts are for us.
They are.
Segment TV is not.
You could get into segment TV.
Gotta tighten it up.
We're going to get to that. But what I'm hearing from you is like this obsession, right? And I think what's so cool, and I get obsessed with things too, and obviously you took it to a whole nother level, so I don't want to compare myself at all. But growing up, I was the type of kid that my mom would literally give us drills in the backyard to do every single day. And I loved playing wall ball. And like my favorite memories are being in the backyard with my dad, playing lacrosse, learning how to do the rocker step. Was the rocker step your step?
I stepped rockerly.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
From time to time. Yeah.
Where you kind of like go.
Yeah. I actually did it out of the midfield where I was, typically a rocker step is for an attackman when you're coming around
the goal.
X, and then you rocker and get the defender to lean in the direction that you hesitated, and then you come around and shoot. And I would actually carry up top and rocker and keep going down the alley and shoot. So yes.
And the amount of times, I think was it you that started that?
No.
I forget who it was.
I can really take credit for any move. Maybe a swim move.
Yeah.
Maybe like a really, very fundamental off hip shot on the run down the alley.
Swim move like that.
Yeah. I like to swim. Maybe because I swam growing up.
Well,
bad jokes.
The amount of times my dad practiced the rocker step behind the goal, and like actually in my highlight tape that you guys can see on YouTube, there's a video of me doing it, and it was just the coolest feeling ever, actually like nailing it. Isn't that the best feeling when you're younger and you practice something over and over and over again in your backyard, and then you do it in a game and you're like,
it felt like an hour ago when I was thinking about how do I help Kate cold open this? I'm going to say I want to lift, and then I'm going to challenge her to a race, and then I'm going to try to fool her and get a head start. And
you nailed it.
Felt good.
Yeah.
Felt good.
First try. The first try is always the best.
First try, always.
But I want to talk about this idea of obsession, because we talked about this earlier on. Like when a lot of kids sign up for sports, it's like when you started in lacrosse, you were like, I want to do what my friends are doing. Yeah. My neighbor gave me the stick. He's playing lacrosse. I should play lacrosse. I want to be with my friends, socialize, whatever. But you got to the point where you were like, I want to get so good at this that I'm playing like the top players on this team.
Yeah.
So when you're a sophomore in high school, like what was your North Star?
I mean, it's a great question, because you were also asking, I think I sort of weaved around it, like advice to parents and things of that nature. And so parents that are listening that have a son or daughter that's playing a sport or in the arts or what have you, if you want them to excel, first check yourself. Like, is this you living out your life through them? Who wants to excel? Is it them or is it you? And then move to, I think, the most important thing, what you're asking. Are they obsessed? Do they love it? Can they not put the stick down? And then your job is to actually, pending the age, help guide them through that obsession. So for me, I was so obsessed with lacrosse that practice wasn't a thing. And I noticed for my peers, they were practicing because their coach told them to practice. I was practicing because I just loved lacrosse. And I would be against the wall at night, and my dad would come home from work and he would pull to the side and turn on his headlights so I could keep seeing and playing. And that was like an example of just what is a determining factor if you're a parent. Is your kid out there? Do they truly love it? That's one. And then number two is take a pretty objective eye into how they're performing. Like I get a lot of parents that come to me and about like, hey, my son, my daughter, they want to play Division I lacrosse. And my first question is, how are they playing now? You know, and are they one of the best players on their midfield line? Do they start? Are they one of the best players on the team? When they play games, are they one of the best players on the field? Are they one of the best players in the league, in the city, in the state, in the country? And it's shocking how big the delta is between desire to play Division I lacrosse and a kid just not being ready yet to pursue that path of being recruited. And so it's not like, okay, you give me all the answers that are saying they're not the best on the team or the city or your state or the country. It doesn't mean they can't be, but your question to me should be, how can they improve? Not how can they play Division I lacrosse, right? And so we skip a lot of steps. So think about where your daughter, where your son is. Focus on how they can be, because recruiting is kind of like a first date. You sort of have one shot. And so you don't want to put yourself out in front of a coach until you feel like you're at your best. So work really hard, improve, be the best version of yourself, and then take that and see if you want to play at the next level.
We both have talked to a lot of athletes. You're an athlete yourself, greatest of all time lacrosse players, right?
Go on.
But I feel like that's a common thread, right? Like when I was interviewing Gabby Thomas, gold medalist, Olympic runner, right? She was saying to me that her favorite thing about the sport is the training, and actually racing is the cherry on top.
It's an amazing mindset, and Gabby's really astute. Like she studies the psychology of sport, and you have to be at the absolute pinnacle of the mind and body to play in the Olympics, because she'll train her entire life and then within Olympics for 4 years for 10 seconds, you know, and like, so you have to have mental fortitude. And for Gabby to get there, you have to embrace the grit, the training. LeBron James says the same thing. Just fall in love with the process, not the outcome. The games are, I had a former Team USA coach who's now the coach of the New York Atlas, and Mike Pressler, when I was 24 playing on his team and starting at midfield wearing 99, he would come to me before games and go, Paul, the script is already written. And that would allow my shoulders to relax and just go play. Because I would sometimes, naturally, when you're playing in a world championship for a gold medal, you're so outcome focused. Are we going to win? Are we going to lose? What's the score? How am I playing? Minute by minute, second by second. Just get the fuck out of that mindset. Focus on the work.
What does your mental prep look like? Gabby talked a lot about visualization. What went into your mental prep?
Before mental prep is preparation, and that's work and studying and doing role playing, going back to the field of creativity, or thinking about scenario planning in the world of business. But preparation isn't just about like what the task forthcoming is. For me, what separates, I think, great, artists or athletes who prepare is they also work on what could possibly come yet unseen. And so prepare. Then once you have the preparation done through the practice and the work, then it's about getting the mind right. And Gabby references that, or other great athletes, which is, how do you calm the mind? How do you make sure your body feels good? All of the hundreds of thousands of thoughts settle in before high achieving, high performance happens. So what I would do, and I spent a lot of time with a sports psychologist guy, John Elliott, who was sports psychologist in Major League Baseball and the NBA with Team USA. And he opened up my whole routine. I used to show up at games 2 hours early to mentally prepare. And then I started showing up 4.5 hours early. And the reason why was like, okay, I was a captain of my team and I was a high performer. And to be a captain, you have to cater to your teammates. And when they show up 2 hours before, that's time with, not time for yourself. So get there early. Simple, like fundamental shift. Get there early, work on yourself. Go through your physical preparation, your mindset. And then when the team comes, you're there as a leader. So I changed the time frame. And then what I do is I used to take a pregame nap. He was like, cut the nap. And the reason why he asked me that is, do you nap during the rest of the week? I was like, no. And he was like, so why would you nap before a game? Seems pretty risky. I was like, because I'm nervous or whatever and got a long time to wait for the game. Stop. So go for a walk. Do something you enjoy. Go to cinema. And then I would bring a notepad and I'd pack an extra lunch because I'd be in the locker room 4 hours before. So there's the emotionality of like what helps you as a high performer. And then there's the tactics and having a good support system, a therapist, sports psychologist, a teammate, a coach who can say like, tactically, what can we do to change this environment so you feel better is important.
You were on a podcast, The Deal with Jason Kelly and A-Rod, and I think you guys were talking a little bit about sports psychology,
Yeah.
and I loved what you and A-Rod called it. You called it performance training.
Essentially, it's about framing, and we do it naturally as humans, and we don't realize that's what we're doing. But it's so important to develop that skill. The other side of the coin is the phrase, right? So especially when you're faced with challenges, it's looking those challenges dead on and understanding why and taking the accountability and doing the work. And then you have to reframe. And that's like the positive outlook. What are we going to get out of this? Right. So the business faces a challenge. Instead of going, it's not working, you recognize that challenge to make change. And then if the change is right, you come on the other end and then you actually are glad that that challenge happened. So a reframe. I joke sometimes because Martin Scorsese is my favorite director, and he did The Irishman, and Robert De Niro. Totally strange comparison. Said that he paints houses, and he was basically like a hitman, right? And I often think that I work in a frame shop, and I frame pictures for a living, and that's a good thing. You want to make sure that you're constantly wrapping all of the challenges and life's unexpected circumstances with positivity.
Yeah. You know, my first job actually was working in a frame shop.
Was it?
Mm-hmm.
Look at that. If you sit around with another person long enough and you're present and you're conscious and you connect as beings, we're the same. And I believe in our psychic abilities. And I had no idea about you that you were, worked at a frame shop for your first job. We're kind of in flow.
Let's talk about recruiting. I liked on The Deal how you were saying how lacrosse now is just like fundamentally different than it was when you were in the process of recruiting. But why Hopkins, and how did getting recruiting there come to be? And were you considering other schools?
Yeah.
Like, what was that process like?
Well, Hopkins was sort of 4th or 5th on my list of choices.
What was number 1?
North Carolina. My dad went to the University of North Carolina. I've had 22 relatives that have gone through Chapel Hill, and I idolized Michael Jordan and Dean Smith, and then Bill Guthridge, and like I wanted to go to basketball games every other night, and just generally, like I went to basketball camp when I was younger, and then it sort of moved through the ACC, because if you'd watch March Madness with your dad, and like Carolina gets knocked off, then you support the other ACC schools. So I looked at Virginia, and then now Syracuse is in it in the ACC, but it's different than in Maryland and Duke and then Hopkins. And I didn't like Hopkins for a couple of reasons. It was local, and I had this sort of urge, as any teenager would, to go out and move somewhere else. But they had also been the number 1 team in the country for the last 4 years with number 1 classes. And the note that I was getting from my friends and parents and lacrosse commentators is that if you go to Hopkins, you're going to have to wait till your junior year to play. And then I met Dave Petramala, who was my head coach, eventually my head coach. And the way that he recruited and built relationships was extraordinary. And I just cared about this man, and I aligned with what he stood for, his core values. And I felt that he was being honest to me. I remember him cutting out a newspaper clipping and whiting out the name of the player who scored the game-winning goal in the previous year in the championship game, and wrote my name in there. And he was telling me that I was going to play and have an impact on the team my freshman year. And everyone else was telling me that he was full of shit and that they had all these great players and he just wanted to keep stacking classes. But I believed him. And, when we would talk on a recruiting call every week, because they could call once a week, we'd talk for an hour, sometimes an hour and a half. I didn't think much of it as a 17-year-old at the time. But now, as an almost 40-year-old, I look back and like, if I'm going to call a 16 or 17-year-old, it's probably 10 minutes, maybe at best.
Yeah.
The hell am I going to talk about? But that's how most of my recruiting calls went. I'd get a call from Carolina and Syracuse, Virginia, Duke, and we'd talk for 12 minutes. And Petra was so invested in his players. And that's why the team was so good. And I ended up changing my entire sort of plan. And they went from number 5 to number 1. And I decided and committed And it was the best decision I had made.
That's such a testament to who he was as a person too. Like I mean, also he could tell that you were going to be this rock star. I think that was pretty clear by the time you were junior, senior in high school. So he obviously saw something in you.
Yeah.
But just that he gave you that type of attention. Also, it's rare to have like those types of role models in your life. And like when you get to have one as your coach, it's like so much more impactful. What would your advice be to, college athletes starting their freshman seasons?
I wish I had a better answer for you because I don't know it. And I don't think anyone knows it, which makes sports so fascinating. But what I believe to be true for me is that I dream big and I work small. And dreaming big is scary. And dreaming big also means articulating those dreams. I think a lot of those kids in the room when we were in 8th grade had their hands up because who doesn't want to play Division I lacrosse on a full scholarship if that's the sport of your choice? But what do you do after that? Right. And there is only a small segment of people that actually like have these speculative ambitions to be the best. It's not for everyone. And it's pretty lonely and it's fucking hard and it doesn't get easier. But if you have that dream, you might as well embrace it. And part of, I think, what deters people from embracing is today's environment of social media and the negativity and the calling out by even your own peer group. But part of the path of dreaming big is articulating that dream. And I used to tell people I want to be the best. I used to tell people I wanted to be a 4-time first-team All-American and win 4 straight national championships. And I didn't do either of those. But I had to say it to stand a chance to accomplish it. And then you tuck those dreams away and you work small. And that's the 100 shots a day. That's, sometimes measuring yourself up against the work ethic of the senior captain on the team. And like, are they showing up early? I'm going to show up earlier. I used to study Michael Jordan, and that was his thing, is he would always challenge at any age the best player on the court to a one-on-one after practice. And that's scary for a lot of people because what's on the other side of losing that game? You lose all your confidence. You're not who you thought you were. People are afraid of competition. And so you have to embrace that. And that comes with building a relationship with failure, which is inevitable. And then just keep fucking going. And that's what I did. I went to Hopkins. I was told by a lot of people I wouldn't start. Petro did not guarantee me that I would start. He just knew that I could contribute to the team. And I didn't start in game 1. And then in game 3, we were at Syracuse in the Dome, down 7-1 at halftime. And I was playing second line midfield. And he goes, "Paul, you're playing first line midfield the second half." And I scored 4 goals and we won in overtime. Wow. And I started for the rest of my career. So it's just being opportunistic and being hungry for it.
And having that confidence and knowing that you can do it and like being able to rise to the occasion,
100%. And confidence comes from your preparation and your mindset.
That was in 2005. You were a freshman, right? 2005, Hopkins wins the national championship. Yeah. You're on the team. Yeah. Pretty incredible high for a kid that's saying, I'm going to win 4 national championships. Yeah. You're probably thinking, we're starting off strong. Yeah.
And we're not going to lose because that year we went undefeated as well. So it was like, okay, I'm going to finish my 4-year career undefeated in 4 national championships. Didn't come close to that.
I was at the game when it was Hopkins versus Syracuse in the national championship where Syracuse won, but I have pictures of myself like in a Hopkins shirt cheering.
There you go.
So I was supporting you.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
We would go,
oh my, like my whole life was in those early years. My dad would take us to all the Final Four tournaments.
So fun, right?
So fun.
Just a great celebration of the sport, the Final Four is.
Yeah. Well, 2005, you guys win the national championship. You also win in 2007. I have a few questions here. First, I want to know, like, what did the evolution of Paul look like in those years?
Yeah.
How did your game change? And like, did you become more of a leader on the team?
Yeah, more and more competitive. And I got my big pop in competitive juice from Petro. He's still probably the most competitive man I've ever been around. And then he paired me when I was a freshman with our senior captain who won the Tewaaraton that year, which is our Heisman Trophy of lacrosse, and that's Kyle Harrison. Even on my recruiting visit, I stayed with him as a junior, and typically on your recruiting visits, you stay with freshmen. So Petro always put me to that standard. And I remember even in the offseason doing sprints next to Kyle, lifting with Kyle, and then I was playing with Kyle. So when Kyle graduated, I was like, okay, I got to be Kyle. And that was a shift in leadership, because as a freshman on a team, you can just play. And as a sophomore and now thwarted in the position of best on the team, you need to lead. And that was a struggle. And I still feel like leadership is today. And no one ever gets it right. You just, it's a journey. And so you learn different things along the way. And I would say the difference between college and then as I got into pro and now as an entrepreneur and the stuff that I do today, my temperament has shifted each time. In college, it was very much like high demanding of teammates at all costs. And that was pretty ruthless. And that carried on through probably my 4 years in the pros, where, you know, I'd fight teammates in practice sometimes if they weren't meeting my expectations and what I knew as someone who experienced success early because of others it took to be great. So the standard is really high. Go back to Michael Jordan. Like, I'm trying to emulate him. He fought teammates in practice. And it was like, if you weren't at his standard, you were out. And then that wears on you. And so like the part two of leadership was as I got probably in the middle of my pro career. And that's when I was introduced to John Elliott as a sports psychologist. And I shifted more towards being hyper competitive and compassionate.
Yeah.
And understanding that not all players on the team, even at the pro level, and this is in the NBA, the NFL, the PLL, the NHL, are alphas. At one point they were, but you need, even in business, you need A players, B players, C players, because if you have a bunch of A players, no one's going to do the B work, which is a lot of the support work and sort of like the gritty stuff, getting tough ground balls, taking wings of face-offs, making the right first pass, right? If you have a bunch of A players that all want the ball in their stick, you have 1 ball and 6 offensive players. It's not going to work. So a general and wider understanding calms you down. And now professionally, outside of playing, my leadership, I would say, is focused on being present and supportive, still competitive and motivational, but, you know, keeping the moments of grabbing teammates by the collar and saying like, let's go, and firing them up. Because if I'm in that position now, it means I haven't brought on the right people at the company. And fortunately, we've done a good job of that. So I actually get a lot of push from them.
I remember being in high school and being even just like at track practices. And when I was a freshman, I was varsity cross country, varsity track, varsity lacrosse. And I remember my winter track season, I was doing drills with this girl. We were doing like a running, I don't even know, exercise, I guess. And I took everything I did seriously because I didn't know any better. And I remember she said something where she kind of embarrassed me in front of like all these girls. And I was this young girl where I just assumed everybody tried hard, but she ended up getting kicked out of the practice for kind of putting me down for trying hard. And I just like the way you said it, because it was definitely a common theme for me in sports, where if people weren't trying hard enough, I would get like frustrated because you just want people to care as much as you do. And at the end of the day, nobody's going to care.
I heard Travis Scott say this once in an interview, but he was basically lamenting on, you're going to make fun of me for trying hard. You're going to make fun of me for caring. Fuck you.
Isn't it crazy that it's a common experience though with high achievers?
Yeah, you will face that. And just ask yourself like core roots of integrity that run in your system. Is not trying hard the way? No.
So as people that both love UNC, I've got a fiance that went to UNC. That was like my dream school when I was playing lacrosse. You loved UNC. I've got brothers that beat Duke and won national championship. There's just nothing better than beating Duke.
I mean, yeah, I guess I got a head start with my dad because we supported Chapel Hill and the Tar Heels, and like you hated the Cameron Crazies and you spelled Duke D-O-O-K. And so it's an easy opponent to dislike. And then I grew up in Maryland. So the Terrapins at the time with Gary Williams, they were going against the J.J. Redick's of the world, who's a wonderful human being. Mm-hmm. And Coach K is one of the greatest coaches of all time in any sport.
They're just so good at everything.
It's just one of those things. It's like human nature. And I it's interesting, like with all the sort of sports psychology and therapy and all the resetting I've had to do in my life, and match that with being in the business of sport for a living, is I've actually pulled back from fandom, which is ironic given that like fandom is the heartbeat of what we do. But but I love Duke and I love Hopkins and I love Carolina and I love Maryland, and I get where everyone's coming from.
It's just that collegiate mindset.
But it felt good. It felt good at the time to kick their ass.
Yeah, that's the winner mentality in you. Okay. Well, after college, you start playing in the MLL, but you also had a real estate job, right?
Mm-hmm.
You played in the MLL for 11 seasons before starting your own professional league.
Mm-hmm.
What were the foundational or like fundamental things that were going on in the MLL that you were like, we need to change?
Yeah. Well, because I had a job in real estate, that was like point number one as to why or what MLL needed to change, is like no one really talked about it. And the fact that I was, one of the top players in the country and just coming off national championship games and playing in front of 500,000 people on TV and 50,000 people in a stadium and not thinking about professional, something's wrong there. Then you look at why I couldn't. Well, my rookie wage was $6,000. So by the time I got through that singular focus of college and shifted into pros, and I was drafted to play at the time for the Boston Cannons, I had taken this job so I could actually have income. I moved back home with my parents, so I could focus on my practice and becoming better against that same wall I grew up against. And then within sort of 6 months and the adoption of social media and the challenge that I was given by my first agent, who told me, the peak moment is behind us. It was your senior year on that national championship stage. Let's try to get as much 3-year sponsorship income as we can, yada, yada. I was like, okay, you're not for me. We parted ways. And that was that challenge that I needed to be like, all right, I'm going to prove this wrong. And I left my job in real estate. And I got back to center, which was, I love this game. I want to be the best player in the league. I want to be the best player in the world. I want to be one of the best players to have ever played this game. I need to focus on it. And so the storytelling, the creativity led to what inevitably be that income that I'd lost by leaving my job, which was sponsorship dollars. So I got a deal with Under Armour and then Red Bull and GoPro, and then I switched over to New Balance, and I was telling stories across YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And then I started doing commercials, and it was an extraordinary experience. But what was sort of the cloud hanging over us is, as I was growing and sort of defying the odds of what my first agent told me, the pro game was actually getting worse. The crowds were shrinking, and the network deal went away, and sponsorships were minimalizing, and weirdly, participation in the college game kept growing. And then I looked across the aisle, and MLS was growing and UFC was growing. And I was like, why not lacrosse? Not classically trained as an entrepreneur, didn't have my MBA. But I began scratching my head, and my brother, who was working in Silicon Valley at the time, was looking to potentially leave his software company that he was running on the revenue side and start something new. And we sat together and we talked about lacrosse. And neither of us had any pro sports operating background, but that was fuel. And we had probably 3 years of conversations with MLL owners, with venture capitalists, with NBA, NFL commissioners, and learned. And we built this hypothesis that tied why pro lacrosse hadn't worked with why we thought it could. And we began to quietly take that out to market. But the altruism behind it was in the lesson that I was learning through leadership at that stage of my life, which was sharing, and the growth that you get through numbers. And so if there were more full-time professional lacrosse players that could afford to do it like I was because of sponsorship and media, well, let's create a bigger and better platform for them to do that and watch the sport grow.
What I love about what you said at the beginning of that was you were having this incredible experience personally, getting all these incredible sponsorships. Paul Rabil was becoming this massive icon of the sport and in just athletics. But you literally said to yourself, well, if the league itself is dying, I don't care about my personal brand. And I think that speaks so much to your character and just how much you love the sport.
Thank you. Yeah. And I would say I've transitioned more into a host and to a curator. And I'm still on screens, but I'd like to think that I'm on screen articulating different messages. When I was doing it early on, it was about, me as a professional lacrosse player, and the work I was doing in lacrosse obviously permeated through whatever medium I was on, because that was what I was doing. And now on screen, talking about the PLL, the history of the sport, the future of the sport, the Olympics, the men's and the women's game, the stars in both of those games. And that's a new sort of experience for me. And I like the art of presenting and storytelling, and I hope that I'll always be fortunate enough to do it.
When you were first starting out the PLL, would you say your edge was that you were the best player in the MLL and one of the best players in the game, and so you were able to successfully recruit people to come play for the PLL?
Yeah, it goes back to relationships, and it's the question's apropos to the earlier one you asked about Petro, which was, the relationship that you build are the most important in any business. And the trust and the relationship you build with your audience as a creator or podcaster or an author is more important than the content on the pages or what comes through the mic. And I didn't know that I was going to start a new league with my brother. But what I was focused on was building good, sound, healthy, competitive relationships with my peers, my teammates, and my competitors. And we would butt heads on the field, but there's this level of mutual respect that you have. And because I was doing it off the field, they trusted that I could sort of meet the promises that we were putting out to them, that we could do it with them. And had we not had that inside, or what an investor would say is your unfair advantage, right? A great venture capitalists will say they look for founders that exhibit ABC and hard and soft skills, but more importantly, do they have an unfair advantage? Otherwise, you're just competing. And I think at the time, our unfair advantage was our relationship with the players. And the Achilles heel of the former league was that we were all under 1-year contracts. So in effect, we could sign people overnight and start a new league. Can't do that in the NBA or the NFL right now. The contract terms are staggered. You could start a competitive league, but you're not going to get everyone at once. And we pretty much literally got everyone at once. We got 140 guys overnight.
So you just took them all from the MLL.
200. Well, all of our contracts expired, including myself. So I was doing it with them, which was part of the relationship.
How did the MLL feel about the PLL? Were they like, what the heck is going on?
Yeah, they did not like us.
Our best player is now taking our best players.
Yeah, they were livid. They were really pissed. But in fairness to us, our original goal was to try to build a new league with MLL. So we went in with capital to them and said, we can buy you, we can invest in you. Here's our plan. And understandably so. Like I often think back of if I was the investor looking at Paul and Mike Rabil coming into the room that had no sports experience, that had capital, that said they could build a better mousetrap, I would have said, too risky. They don't know. I'd say no.
Not the mousetrap analogy.
Yeah. And so it was sort of like that was the mindset. So I get it, but I was pissed. And, sort of the more you know, the more you don't was the unveil of like, okay, they told us no. They told us no again. They told us no a third time. But each of those times we've learned more, and what else can we learn? And let's go out and explore. And we got to that place pretty quickly. And that's why our business model shifted too. And we were learning from why MLL failed. We weren't just blaming, they just don't know what they're doing. No, we were learning what the audience wanted, how small the audience was, what we could do differently. And we were presenting that all in stealth mode, is what an entrepreneur would say, because in an industry that's really public facing like sports, it can get competitive and litigious and like really difficult. So you have to do things quietly. And it's like when the Baltimore Colts moved out of Maryland, it was overnight. And so that's what it felt like with the PLL. We kind of pulled the players overnight, and we were all under NDA, and then it happened and everyone said we were going to fail, and we kept building.
And you're not just a former lacrosse player and the best lacrosse player of all time. The future of the sport is in your hands. Do you feel that pressure?
I feel pressure. And I think it's because I care so much about the game. And I realize that I'm really fortunate to be in a leadership position to actually impact change. And so the pressure is, are we doing the right things? Are we taking the right bets? Are we being measured? Are we also being ambitious? Are we doing this with integrity? Are we communicating with everyone? Does everyone feel seen? Cross players to casual fans that we're bringing in, a lot of pressure. But then I tell myself and remind myself that this game was a gift from the creator. It was built in spirituality. It was known as the medicine game. The harder you play, the greater the medicine. It was used to solve conflict. And then it was used in exhibition, where the people from the Onondaga Nation called it Dehongtik which means they bump hips. Tuortan in Mohawk means little brother of war. And Begataway is another name for lacrosse. It's called the net game. So which within each of those original names of the sport that we play today called lacrosse is a different intent. And so you can calm your nerves if you ever feel pressure in whatever it is you do by thinking about the history and those who came before you and how fortunate we are to be where we are today.
I think there's like a common thread with successful people, especially ones that I've interviewed like yourself, where it's like, even in the face of hard times where people are telling you no, the people that come out on top and succeed are the ones that just keep going.
Yeah.
And you and your brother just kept going, learning along the way. And now you could literally do anything. In 2020, the PLL and the MLL ended up merging.
Yeah.
Was that an emotional experience for you?
It was. And it was really important. So we ended up turning around and merging with Major League Lacrosse in 2020 after sort of the bubble seasons of playing during the pandemic. And that helped resolve the conflict that existed within lacrosse fans and the zeitgeist of lacrosse. It also gave us, at the time, 20 years of pro lacrosse history to bolt on to our broadcast and begin telling stories and consolidating stats of players who've done both and players who retired who never got to play in the PL. So we announced the Professional Lacrosse Hall of Fame for the first time, where we could recognize those first players in 2000 and 2001. And that was so important and something that I'm really grateful for.
Yeah, it's amazing to be able to merge a new league with the history of an old league and just the commonality of everybody loves the sport. So it's like you want the sport to win. Where do you see lacrosse going? Like, what is the future of the sport in your mind?
Well, speaking of dreaming big, I want to be a top 5 team sports league in North America. And so we all know the big 4, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and Major League Baseball. And then you have MLS, but then you have like individual sports like the UFC. You have the emergence of the WNBA and a team sports side, and the NWSL, and super competitive. But you have to set those big dreams, and then you have to work small. For me, I look at other ways to grow. I call them third doors, but getting lacrosse back into the Olympics is going to be really advantageous for the sport's growth. Getting a documentary done on the PLL called Fate of a Sport, writing a book called The Way of the Champion, doing a series right now with ESPN called Rabel's Places. I'm working on, a motion picture. And then the last third door that I'd say is like participation. So access, getting more sticks in hands and goals on field. And you do that through a nonprofit approach. You can do it through public lobbying. Right now there's 28 states, Nevada being the most recent, that sanction high school boys and girls lacrosse, which gets us our equipment, something we talked about when we were running, such that we can try and play and fall in love before we buy. So I'm going to flip the other 22 states. And that takes a lot of public and lobbying efforts. Those things actually help the PLL and the WLL grow. And I anticipate over the next 3 to 4 years, us bringing on owners of teams and building stadiums or inhabiting existing stadiums, continuing with our network partner in ESPN and growing the visibility of the sport, and all of that we got to get right. So it is really like trying to boil the ocean. But we have an amazing team. We have a great mission. We have company values that are core and align with us as individuals. And I think we're going to do it.
I think you're going to do it too. I'm a big fan of the sport. I come through from a lacrosse family. My dad didn't play lacrosse growing up. My mom didn't play lacrosse, but they just fell in love with it. My dad still goes to a lot of the college games. He loves going to the Final Four tournament. I mean, he's just such a fan. He wears his yellow cross polo proudly.
Love.
And he's very involved with this organization called Harlem Lacrosse. So for people and parents out there that love the sport, not only for their kids, but also just for future generations, what can we be doing to continue educating people on the sport and making it more accessible?
It's a great question. I would say two things. Because at a high level, I would love to tell people, give them instructions or manuals, but like I'm lucky enough to be paid to work alongside great people whose responsibility is to grow the PLL, WLL, and the game at large. And that takes a lot of work and resilience. So if people do want to chip in, like your dad and like yourself, I would say two things. One, sort of metaphorically, that helped me is that give your backup stick to someone who's never played before, like my neighbor did to me. Introduce them to the game. It could be through a stick. It could be through telling them to watch the PLL, bringing them to a game. And then the other thing I would say would be to invest in the community, invest in your community. And if you're a parent and you want to, be an assistant coach or volunteer coach, my dad did that. My dad was our swimming coach, our basketball coach, our soccer coach, and sort of touched lacrosse. Not still learning the rules now. He'll get mad at me for that, but
didn't he send you an email before like all of your games?
Every single game.
So cute.
He was just an amazing man.
I would literally have those framed. In my hallway in my house.
Oh, so good. Yeah, he would write me an email all the way through my pro career, so college and pro, before every game, and give me insights and his thoughts. And he would be nervous, and then he'd say a prayer at the end of the email. So yeah, I would say give your backup stick to a friend, watch the PLL, watch the WLL, and contribute to the community.
You're a writer, you're a producer, you're working on so much even outside of just lacrosse. So 5, 10, 20 years from now, where do you want to be and what do you want your legacy to be?
I want to keep storytelling, and I want to keep trying new things. And so 20 years from now, I hope to still be involved in the PLL and the WLL. I hope that it is a top sport in America that's continually played in the Olympics. And I hope that I am also going to be venturing into new things that are big and scary, like directing, producing, writing more. But ultimately, kind of going back to what my parents did for me is be spiritual and care about family. So be a good partner, be a good father. That's our legacy, if there is a legacy that we can leave.
I have to tell you this really quickly as we wrap up. When I was in 6th grade, I wrote a letter to myself. It was an assignment my teacher had us do. And in the letter, we wrote where we see ourselves in 10, 15 years. And in that letter I said, you're going to be a D1 lacrosse player and you're going to be on the cover of Lacrosse magazine standing next to your two brothers, right? Now that did not happen. Obviously, my life took me in a different direction, but I do have to say, I am sitting proudly in front of one of the best, if not the best lacrosse player of all time. And I just have to say, I think my 12-year-old self is freaking out right now.
Oh, you're so sweet. You're so sweet. And I had a similar experience when I was 12, but I don't want to.
He's like, but I did go on the cover of Lacrosse.
No. It was different. I actually, in art class, we were doing portraits and I decided to go more abstract, and I drew myself as a WWE superstar with the people's eyebrow of The Rock, because I was obsessed with him. I wanted to meet The Rock. And when I met The Rock, that felt like manifestation. So it's such a powerful thing. I appreciate you saying that. And I would respond by saying you're doing far bigger and greater things. And it's been really fun to spend time together and watch you continue to do what you do.